Let me bring in Dr. Corey Hebert, professor at LSU Health Science Center. Doctor, good to have you with us tonight.
Good to be here.
What is your professional conclusion? Is there risk in vaccines to the level where it has to be, people have to be concerned about it being mandatory?
Well, honestly, after doing research for the last 20 years in this field, at this point, there are no scientifically based studies to say that there's any more risk in vaccination that would cause you to not want to vaccinate your child because of the risks of the actual diseases that are out there in the United States right now. For example, we're talking about the measles vaccine. You know, measles vaccine is very important. But in California, we also had a measles outbreak. We also had a meningitis outbreak. We also had a pertussis outbreak. And let's be very clear here. There's some parts of Los Angeles that have vaccination rates below 20%. And we know that that's less than in some developing countries. If you don't have a herd immunity of at least 90%, then the people that really need to be vaccinated, meaning the children, they're not going to be vaccinated. They're not going to have the antibodies high enough to fight the disease if they don't happen to get vaccinated because they're too young. So I have a practice right now. I can't have a 4-month-old in my practice, and he is not old enough to get the measles vaccine, but your child is 1-year-old and you refuse to get the vaccine, and then you give that 4-month-old the measles, then who's going to be happy then? And tongue in cheek, I just have to say, you know, when your child gets measles and they get a complication like subacute sclerosing panencephalitis and they're about to die, call Jim Carrey then and see who will want to talk to you, your doctor or Jim Carrey. Who will feel dumb and dumber then, Ed?
Well, Doctor, wouldn't the opponents of this mandatory law argue that those numbers are very small? And it just doesn't, it interferes with the civil liberties of a family that they are being told what has to be injected into their child when across the board, it's not totally perfect. Would you admit to that?
Right. Nothing is totally perfect. I mean, we know one of the biggest killers in America is Tylenol, and nobody reads the package insert on that. So we have to talk about science here. So the reality is that, you know, when you have risk, there are risks with everything, but without vaccination and sanitation, the United States probably wouldn't be here right now.
All right. I'd like to bring in Christina Hildebrand. She's the founder and president of A Voice for Choice. Christina, good to have you with us again tonight. I want to continue our discussion. Your main focus on this is, it sounds like a civil rights issue, that you want parents to have the final say over medicine, yet medicine says we've got to protect society. Where do you come down on this?
I agree with you. It's completely a parental rights issue. It's also a constitutional issue. It's also a, where does the government, how far can the government reach? And is this overreach? And it is overreach. We can't be having our government telling us what we put into our bodies and into our children's bodies when it comes to pharmaceutical drugs, especially vaccines. Vaccines, there is no liability for the vaccine manufacturers. So you cannot sue a vaccine manufacturer if you have an adverse reaction. That's huge. That to mandate a vaccine, regardless of whether you're for or against vaccines, to mandate something that there is no liability for, you cannot sue over, is just for the government to do that is just flat out wrong.
Doctor, what about that? I want to get Dr. Hebert's response to that. Doctor, what about that last statement?
Yeah, I think that what she's saying is very important because there is a reporting agency called VAERS that is a reporting agency for all adverse events.
There is, but it is very underused and people don't know about it.
No. More than underused, it's also erroneous because anyone can actually report to VAERS, not just a doctor. So if I have a fever after I have a vaccination, I can call, or if there's a bum on the street that wants to call and say my friend's child had a vaccination reaction, he can call too. So we got to be very careful about that. So when parents hear about these vaccination injuries, they hear about all these things in VAERS, but VAERS is something that is not regulated and anyone can call.
But I'd go even
Christina,
further to
your
say that
response.
VAERS is not properly used. VAERS is pretty much obsolete. It's not used correctly. The doctors do put their things in. The parents put their issues in. But regardless, when you look at it, there is a vaccine court, which is a government-organized, a no-fault, no-juried court where you can go if you have an anaphylactic shock and you have a permanent disability, or if you die from a vaccine. That's your 1 in a million number of having an adverse reaction to vaccines. If you have anything less than that, so there are plenty of parents out there whose children have had seizures. You just look at the vaccine package inserts of any of these vaccines, which are not given to parents when their children are given vaccinations. Those package inserts are not given. You're given a one-page. You're given a one-page piece of paper from the CDC.
That's not true.
You are not given the whole vaccine insert.
You are always available. That's always available to you.
On those vaccine inserts, it's available, but it's never given. And on that vaccine package insert, it gives you all of the reactions that your child can have or possibly can have. If there is a risk involved, there has to be a choice.
All right. Well, there is no choice after this law. And the question is this going to spread across the country? But, Doctor, this is as heavy a hand as we've seen by a state to do something like this, to tell parents, you must do this with your child or you're not going to be able to send your kid to school. Has nothing to do with religion. All of that stuff is exempt out. Right. All of that stuff is wiped away. I mean, is this taking science into a new direction? Is this taking healthcare in America into a new direction?
It's taking the pharmaceutical companies into a new direction.
Yeah, this is a it's a very harsh law. I totally agree. But you got to remember, not only can you be exempt if you have a medical reason, but even if you have a family history of a medical reason, you still can be exempt. So I think that's pretty fair.
But that's not what happens in the doctor's office. When you go into a doctor's office,
I'm a doctor. I know what happens in the doctor's office. So that's actually what happens in mine.
But when you go into a doctor's office, that doctor's office can have any rule that they want. If you ask the doctors, give me a medical exemption based on my family history, right now, most doctors are not going to do that. They go by their own rules. Most of them say you have to have a vaccine reaction in order to get a medical exemption. And and I will say, if you come in there, the insurance companies also have a huge say in this of what the doctors do.
Well, that's another point I want to bring up here. Are we not? Hold on, I want to get to this point about. I believe that the American company, the American people, do not trust big companies. That this is profit-driven. This is one of the things that Jim Carrey was really getting at, is that we are trusting profit takers and we are trusting people who want to make money and getting in a position in the government to make sure that a law is passed, that their drugs and their vaccines are going to be used. I mean, Doctor, do you have any concern about that?
Well, I mean, it's always concerning because there is no way that everybody can police every corporate organization. We found that from Wall Street to Main Street, okay? But what we have to look at the science and the 20 to 30 studies that have come out in the last 10 years to show the safety of the vaccination. And there's no foolproof method.
Who are those studies done by? They're done by the pharmaceutical companies,
some are independent,
by researchers that are paid by.
Some are independent, and some are not. You're correct.
Very few are independent.
It doesn't matter. Okay. Some of them are not.
So
it does matter.
What we have here,
does absolutely matter.
All right.
No, I mean,
so what
we have independent
here
studies to show that the vaccinations are safe. There are independent studies to show that. I just want to be clear about that.
Vaccines are not 100% safe and effective.
Let me bring up this point, if I may. Hold on. Let me bring up this point, if I may. Let's say the law is going back to the old way, that this law did not pass. How many kids are going to be put at risk? Doctor, I think that's a fair question, isn't it? I mean, how do we know?
There is no crisis.
Right.
There is no crisis at the moment, and this bill did not need to go through. We had a personal belief exemption. There was a law that went into place in 2014, the 2014 school year, which basically said that now, if you want a personal belief exemption, you have to get a doctor's signature on that. You have to have the conversation with your doctor to have what the benefits and the pros and the cons of that are. If you want to have a personal belief exemption, we're talking about 2.5% of California 5 to 18-year-olds, and of that 2.5%, we have no idea, because the state doesn't count it, whether those people are fully unvaccinated or whether they have 30.
Christina, I want to give the doctor the final word here. We're running out of time. Hold on. Hold on a minute. Wait a minute. Hold on. I know that this is very passionate. We could spend hours on this subject. I get that. But I got to give the doctor the final. I want to give the doctor the final word on this. Christina says there's no crisis. Doctor, I want you to respond to that, and then we got to go.
One thing I want to say, I do respect her position, but the most important thing is, you say there's no crisis. Tell that to the baby that I've held, the babies that I've held in my arms that have died from Haemophilus influenza type B vaccine.
And you tell that to the vaccine injured and the kids who have died from
Christina, Hildebrand, Dr. Corey Hebert, great to have both of you with us tonight. We will do this story again because this story's not over.